devolution. It brings the extra powers of taxation in other areas that are needed to finish the job, to rebalance the political debate in Scotland.
But we then have a very unbalanced system.
And that then unlocks constitutional reform across the whole of the United Kingdom. It unlocks whether it's going to be an English Parliament or regional assemblies or whatever the people of England themselves want. It unlocks electoral reform, it unlocks reform of the House of Lords, and maybe even, who knows, the House of Commons.
So for all those English and Welsh people watching tonight, don't think this is not about you. You're about to see a tsunami of political change as a result of what is happening here in Scotland tonight.
Well, we unlock the door. It is for them themselves
to walk through,
to decide what they want to do. That's what democracy is all about.
Two other issues, Mr. Carmichael. When I was talking to Alex Salmond a week ago, he said that after this campaign, if his side won, there'd be no more Team No, Team Yes, there'd be Team Scotland, and that you would be a member of that team.
I mean, this was classic Alex Salmond, wasn't it? It's kicking up dust, it's talking about the process, it's a sort of political equivalent of fantasy football, which really just served to detract attention from the fact that they had no real answers on the issues like the currency, like membership of the European Union, stability of pensions.
I would never accuse the Secretary of State of Scotland for kicking up dust, but you haven't quite answered my question. Would you be a member of Team Scotland if you were asked to be?
Let me tell you this now. I am already a member of Team Scotland. I have always been a member of Team Scotland. That is the job that I do as Scotland's voice in the cabinet table.
But you wouldn't necessarily be a member of Alex Salmond's team post the negotiation for independence.
Well, Alex Salmond, I think, he took one remark that I made and seemed to read an awful lot into it. The suggestion that somehow or another I'm suddenly going to turn tail and become part of Team Salmond, that would be a fairly substantial proposition to swallow.
One final question then, one final area of questions. You represent Orkney and Shetland, and you have suggested that if Scotland votes yes, but Orkney and Shetland don't, Orkney and Shetland, with their massive oil reserves and fishing stocks and so forth, might go off it alone themselves, like the Isle of Man or something.
What we've seen in the last few weeks has been a quite remarkable degree of arrogance coming from the nationalists about the position of the island communities. They have told us that apparently we have no more right to have a discussion about our own self-determination than any other town, or even Sucky Hall Street in Glasgow. That is a fundamental lack of respect and understanding of how Scotland's island communities work. And what I have said today, and I've said it countless times over the year, is that if we ever decide to have that conversation for ourselves, then we are quite entitled to do that, and Alex Salmond and any other nationalist is in no position to stop us from doing that.
And to be clear, this wouldn't be Orkney and Shetland entirely independent. This would be Orkney and Shetland choosing to join the rest of the UK again.
All we're talking about here is the right of our community to have a discussion for ourselves at any time. We've already had a magnificent campaign in the last couple of years called Our Islands, Our Future, where we've been talking to both the UK government and the Scottish government about getting powers for ourselves, more autonomy, because what we've seen, one of the unintended consequences of devolution has allowed the nationalists to suck up power and accountability from the community where it properly belongs to the centre in Edinburgh. Alex Salmond runs the most centralised government probably in Western Europe now.
Now, Hugh Edwards said quite rightly, we've got to be very, very careful at this time in the evening. So I'm going to ask you very gently how you're feeling. Are you feeling optimistic? Bit of a cold sweat coming on?
Look, it's been a 2-year campaign. And there have been ups and downs in every stage of that 2-year campaign. Tonight it's a mixture of excitement, of nervousness, of anticipation, because for me, and I think for everybody who's been involved in it, we're now in a position where we're powerless to alter the result in any way. The people have spoken. We now just need to work out what it is they've said.
Very few unbitten fingernails left in Scotland. Mr. Carmichael, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and back to Hugh in the studio.
Andrew, thank you very much, and thank you to Mr. Carmichael too. Yes, I suppose, Nick, the big interest there for us, and we'll put this to Hamza as well and to Ruth, he's already talking about a no vote and a federal structure that follows if England desires it, in Wales and Northern Ireland too. So the framework of that contribution actually told us quite a lot, didn't it?
It told us a huge amount. It's now up to the English, he said, to have the debate that the Scots have had. And I think you will see, if it's a no vote, and it's a big if still, the Prime Minister will spell that out within hours. I think as soon as this outcome of this referendum is clear, it is very likely that David Cameron will emerge in Downing Street and start to spell out what the next moves he thinks are for Scotland, what the next moves are to deal with what is often called the English question, specifically the voting rights of Scottish MPs within Westminster, whether they should be different as a result of more powers to the Parliament, and that broader question of devolution throughout the UK. Does it mean more powers to the Welsh Assembly than the Northern Ireland Assembly, but to the English regions, either as big cities or as new regions, as New Labour tried. John Prescott, you may remember, tried with a series of referendums that were lost. And you will see that come out. I think it's very likely that after David Cameron comes out, Ed Miliband will come out. We've already, in a sense, had Nick Clegg in recent weeks talking about it. So the notion of English political change, it's on the agenda from now.
Because the demand for Scottish political change is being reiterated by politicians tonight. We had a pledge from the three UK party leaders saying more powers are coming to Scotland. The Yes campaign said you can't trust them. Well, we've had Danny Alexander tonight, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He says a no vote will be a recommitment by the Scottish people to the settlement, but they want change. And Joanne Lamond, leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, says this is a decision that was made now, not in 1707 when the Act of Union that joined England and Scotland together was signed. They're making it very clear that change is on its way and that they will hold that promise, if there's a no vote, of course.
If there's a no vote. Are you still at the point, at this point of the evening, where you're saying, I'm simply not going to discuss that, I still think a yes is possible?
Oh, of course a yes is possible. We always knew that if we wanted to win this, we'd have to reach beyond the usual electorate that votes in general elections or Scottish parliamentary elections. It's clear that has happened. What we don't know, of course, either camp, is what way that has gone, and that's what we'll watch to see and how that unfolds. So, of course, a yes vote is not just possible, but we're confident that the optimism will win the day. In terms of your actual question, I thought you had a refreshingly honest report from John Redwood, MP, and he clearly said that there is, amongst the Conservative backbenches, there is a demand for those same powers that are being promised to Scotland. We think they're not substantial enough, of course, but those powers also being replicated in England. He said, insinuated, of course, that there would be a revolt if there wasn't. Christopher Chope, Tory MP, has said there will be a revolt. 8 months away from a general election, the Prime Minister can't afford a revolt. Either can Ed Miliband, of course, expect, or indeed he can't cope with a revolt, especially when he's trying to get into 10 Downing Street. So I don't think that actually these powers will be coming at all, even the insubstantial ones that we've been promised.
Do you trust the Westminster leaders to deliver on what they've pledged?
Absolutely. And it's not just the Westminster leaders that have done it, it's been the three party leaders in Scotland too, Joanne Lamond, Willie Rennie and myself. And the plans that we drew up, the ones that have been adopted by Westminster, the ones that we're coming together with a delivery plan to make into a single offer that will be in the statute books in March, so that we all go into a general election and people can vote on it, and the legislation is ready to go as soon as that election happens. That was drawn up in Scotland. We had a Strathclyde Commission for the Conservatives, and Diane Abbott, I think she's possibly not really been keeping up with the debate in Scotland. She said that nobody's seen what these powers are. Well, actually, we've had them on our website for months. If you go to www.scottishconservatives.com, you can see them. They're right at the top there. We're very proud of them. And all three parties came up with very similar offers, actually, of things that we thought would work.
They're not the same, though, are they?
They're not completely the same, but they're very similar. The one thing that we looked at that we all agreed should be far greater devolution, should be income tax. Now, that affects the block grant. I think some of my English colleagues are misunderstanding the difference between a block grant and the Barnett formula that calculates that, but I'm sure I'll be able to educate them. And we also looked at the further devolution of some welfare powers as well. Now, there is a difference between where we're going, where the Labour Party and Liberal Democrats are going, but there's movement for further change there, and it's absolutely clear across Scotland that the status quo has been smashed by this referendum debate.
Okay.
We will not have the same Scotland after this that we've had before.
Given that the status quo, as you say, has been smashed, I want to bring in some more of our friends here, because they've been waiting very patiently in the studio with us. Galen, you're in the front row. Yeah, there you are. I think you're 17, aren't you, Galen? From Shetland.
Aye.
Can I ask which way you voted?
I voted yes.
You voted yes. And in a sentence, why?
I just believe it'll be the better off situation for Scotland, really.
Because lots of what we've heard from Shetland during the campaign was to do with distance, it was to do with remoteness, that is to say, you feeling that Edinburgh is remote and for that reason feeling a degree of hostility. You weren't in that camp?
No, well, with the government currently being based in Westminster, it is quite remote, but with it being brought to Edinburgh, yeah, it's still remote, but it'll be better, we'll be closer to it, and we'll more have a louder voice in it.
Did you take a long time to make your mind up, or were you decided at the start of the campaign?
Well, originally, before the campaign really took off about 3 years ago, I was a no supporter, and quite heavily as well. But upon encouragement from my history teacher, who was the head of debating society at the time at my school, encouraging us to look into different political issues, I researched into the opposition at the time, which would have been yes, to get to know their argument so I can counter it. And in doing that, I sort of swayed myself to become a yes. It wasn't a sort of snapshot sort of thing. It was, as someone said earlier, it was a gradual way from no to yes.
OK, what about your fellow 16, 17-year-olds getting the vote for the first time? What was your sense of their, was there a consensus among them?
A lot of them, when I tried to speak about politics, about the referendum to them, they would just ridiculed me. They'd laugh me off and shove me into a corner or something. But in recent months, I've actually seen quite a lot of them that went to school with that have now left school, or they're obviously still in school doing 5th, 6th year. They're actually coming out saying, asking me questions, asking other people questions, having these conversations in the street, hanging about, whatever.
Were they fairly evenly split, or did you sense that most of them were, in the yes camp or no camp? Or?
From what I've seen, which is obviously small snapshots, seeing as I'm working most of the time, but from what I've seen, it's been 50-50 in my year. Half of them are saying yes, half of them saying no. Still a handful that I haven't spoken to. I assume they haven't made up their minds, or well, they have. But yeah, it seems fairly even at the moment.
Good to talk to you, Gail, and thank you very much. Ranbir Patwal, you're in the back row there. Nice to see you. Now, you're from Glasgow, Ranbir, aren't you?
Yes, I live in the south side of Glasgow.
Could I ask you, first of all, how you voted?
I voted no.
And, again, in a sentence for us, why?
Well, the reason was that I'm self-employed and I have concerns that Scotland could not be viable on its own economically. I tend to look at Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland like America, and I see all the different countries like states. Now the states in America have all got individual strength and power, and on the basis of that they stay as the United States of America, and they are world leaders, and that's the way I think is the way forward for the United Kingdom. See each state, as in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, as states with senators like Ed Miliband, all the main party leaders as senators, but give them more strength, whereby with that strength they can stay united and move forward as the United Kingdom.
As you're talking, Ranbir, I can say that we have our first official turnout figure. There it is on the screen for you. It is from Orkney, and it is 84%. Now, that certainly is above the 1951 record, which was around 81%. And if that is replicated elsewhere, in fact, I'm told Clackmannanshire is at 89%.
These are extraordinary.
I mean, 88.6, nearly 89%. I mean, that is a remarkable result, isn't it, really? If that is replicated, Nick, I'm just thinking that would be sending shockwaves throughout the entire electoral process, really.
These are massive figures. I mean, but bear in mind what the backdrop to this is of steadily declining participation in elections, steadily declining participation in politics as a whole, with turnouts in UK general elections in the 60s and people anxious that it was going towards that 60 mark. To get towards 90% of people taking part is really extraordinary. And bear in mind that's 90% of the 97% who were registered, which itself was a record in Scotland. These are really, really
now that we have that figure of 89% in Clackmannanshire, let's go back to Ranbir in the audience, because you're from Glasgow, which has been such a cauldron in this campaign, with lots of people saying that, the SNP has had an incredible, efficient, strong campaign in Glasgow. What's your sense of how that campaign has run itself?
I think the Yes campaign and the No campaign have had strong attributes, but I think the Yes campaign have had a good, strong leadership with the youth of this country, and the youth of this country have been quite passionate about the Yes vote, and using the technology that is available nowadays have pushed the Yes vote to the front, while the No vote although it is strong, has not personified as the yes vote has, unfortunately.
Let's move from Glasgow, if I can. Thank you, Ranbir, for that. We're going to go to a gentleman from Fife, from Dunfermline, Peter Stewart. Peter, thank you very much for coming in. You're a farmer.
Yes.
So, again, if I may, just tell us how you voted.
I voted no. I think farmers and businessmen had three things on their mind. Market, 63 million potential customers in the whole of the UK. And we've worked hard over the years to promote our produce from a quality angle, provenance angle and so on. If we become what is in effect a foreign country, then I think our produce will be looked on differently. The main supermarkets, the big supermarkets, are all headquartered in England. So there's vast competition for shelf space, and I think we will lose the premium market that we've had. We will no longer be the same united family that we've been. We will be in the same position as other foreign countries. The currency has been a big factor. We certainly just don't accept the sort of dictum that's been put out, there will be a currency union. We don't believe that for a second. There had been a strong voice from Westminster saying that's just not going to work. And then the fiscal side of things, if we have different taxation regimes, different spending criteria, you could see headquarters of major firms flipping back and forward depending on what they think is a favourable fiscal situation. So I think the majority of farmers and the majority of businessmen have lined up with the no side.
OK, Peter, that's very useful. Thank you very much. Let's hold that for a second, and I'll be back with you in a few moments. Good contributions, thank you, and explaining the motivations, really, behind the way you voted, which is very interesting for us and for our viewers. Let's have a look at some of the counts that are still going on, because clearly 32 of them in full progress, and now we have that real sense of the challenge for these people, because if they are dealing with turnouts of 84, 85, 67, 89% in some of these areas, you can imagine, especially when it comes to some of the bigger authorities, they'll have big piles of votes to sort through. So just to underline for you, Orkney, final turnout, 84%. Clackmannanshire, which is one of the smallest local authorities too, a bit like Orkney, but in a very different part of Scotland, obviously. That's an interesting place for us, because if that is turning at 89% of people taking part in this process, well, we could be in for a slightly longer night than we thought, but we could be in for an incredibly interesting bit of a roller coaster ride too. Let's go to East Lothian, because our correspondent in East Lothian is Ceredi'n Idasan, and he's in Haddington. Give us a sense of the process there, Ceredi'n.
Yeah. Hi there. Well, this is an area that stretches from Musselburgh through Tranent down towards affluent areas like Dunbar and North Berwick, and we had the first of the 96 ballot boxes coming in here just after 10:35. All the ballot boxes were in by 11 o'clock, and it looks like we might get some idea of a result round about 2 o'clock. We've already heard from across the rest of the country about extraordinary turnout figures. In terms of the postal vote here in East Lothian, 95% of the postal votes issued were returned. So we're talking about some really big record-breaking figures here in East Lothian, and that's being replicated, it seems, across the country. And the early indications here, I've been speaking to both the Yes campaign and the Better Together, and some indications from Yes that they're not expecting to win this here in East Lothian, but their line would be that even if it was a narrow marginal win for No, that they would take some comfort for that, and if that was replicated across Scotland, that might give the Yes campaign a bit of a boost later on in the evening, because there are some quite affluent areas, some quite rural areas. It's round about 90% of this area is farmland, and it's a big area, as I say, going from Musselburgh right the way down to Dunbar on the coast. So lots of different constituencies, and very mixed as well in terms of the makeup of the council and the constituency MSPs and the Member of Parliament here, who is from Labour. So it's a very difficult one to call here, but early indications, speaking to the No campaign, is that they are quietly confident that East Lothian may go their way.
Geraldine, very useful. Thank you very much for updating us in East Lothian. And that hint there, that the No campaign in East Lothian sounding quite confident. Alex Salmond has been on social media. Let me tell you what he's been saying. The First Minister has just said, this has been a remarkable day. Scotland's future, he says, truly is in Scotland's hands. And that, of course, an echo of the speech, the rousing speech he gave in Perth in that final rally when he urged Scottish voters to take their country's future into their hands. So an echo of that. But Mr Salmond glued to the screens, as I'm sure everyone else is, and waiting for the first results to come in. And lots of interest too, as we've been underlining, not just in Europe and in America, but in different parts of the United Kingdom. Certainly in Wales, where they are looking to see what the implications of a yes or no vote could be. And the Plaid Cymru leader, Leanne Wood, is at the Senedd building in Cardiff for us. Leanne, thanks for joining us. And what are your thoughts on what you've heard so far? And what could this mean for Wales?
Well, the whole event has provided a fantastic opportunity for Wales to get the settlement that we need and deserve here. There's a consensus that the financial settlement that we have, that the powers that we have here in Wales are inadequate. And this debate, of course, has been about where power lies. And we know that the power and wealth has been concentrated and centralised around London and the South East. And if there's a yes vote tonight, then that wealth and power will be shared a little bit more equally throughout the countries of these islands. So it's vital that Wales is at the forefront of this debate now, whatever negotiations take place after today, that we make sure that our voice is there, is heard, and that we get the settlement that we need out of this process.
You said there, Leanne, if it's a yes vote. If it's a no vote, we've already heard in some quarters the Barnett formula will be retained for Scotland. What are the implications for Wales, and what would you be saying in some talks about the future of governance of Wales as within the United Kingdom?
Well, Plaid Cymru has been campaigning for many years, even more than a decade, for a reform of the Barnett formula. Wales loses out around £300 million every year to our public services because of the way our funding is calculated. And with the promise to Scots in the event of a no vote that Barnett formula would remain, that causes a problem for us here in Wales. So we need to make sure that this process delivers the fair funding that Wales needs, because we've already been hit by the austerity politics from the Westminster government, and this £300 million every year that we're losing out is giving us too much of a hit, really.
Leanne, we'll see what the result is, but maybe we'll talk to you in the morning when we know what it is. Thanks very much for joining us. Leanne Wood there for us in Cardiff. And let me go straight to Belfast, to Mark Devonport, our political editor there in Northern Ireland at Stormont. Mark, your thoughts on the interest that Northern Ireland has in the outcome. And we've already discussed the potential for a yes and no vote. Let's just say at this stage it's a no vote. What would be the implication there in terms of Northern Ireland's governance?
Well, the immediate repercussion, Hugh, would be less seismic, obviously, than a yes vote, which would put the constitutional status of Northern Ireland once more into the melting pot to some extent. If there's a no vote, though, it, however, would have serious repercussions here, because there will be a discussion about extra powers for Scotland, and that would then immediately beg the question, what extra powers, if any, should be given to Stormont? Top of the shopping list here is the notion of devolving corporation tax, because businesses here compete with businesses south of the Irish border, which enjoy a much lower headline rate of corporation tax. So there is cross-party agreement on that. In relation to other powers, I think that might potentially set unionists against nationalists, because unionists are a bit more sceptical about getting extra powers in case that ends up being a sort of constitutional thin end of a wedge.
Mark Devonport, for now, thank you very much. Mark there for us in Stormont with his thoughts on the options there. We'll be looking at the options in the event of a yes or no vote. Nick, you wanted to come in?
Well, simply that we've seen the crunch already, haven't we? That if there's a no, we've got a great promise made by the three party leaders, the unionist party leaders, that this Barnett formula sounds terribly dull, doesn't it? But it's all about cash. It is quite simply about the amount of public spending here in Scotland. We've just heard that in Wales, They don't want that to happen. We know that English Tory MPs don't want it to happen. So you've got instantly a conflict that's going on between what's been promised in order to try and win this referendum here in Scotland and what is acceptable to people in Wales and England without anybody having an obvious route through.
What's your thought on the way that argument's developing here now, Sarah? Because, of course, if you look at, again, I'm stressing it early, if you look at the potential for a no vote and then the negotiations that follow, how will that play out, do you think?
Well, you will have whatever happens. If there is a no vote, there will still have been a very substantial number of people in Scotland who voted to say that Scotland should be an independent country. And that's not something that you can forget about. When the SNP stood in the 1992 election, not that long ago, their slogan was free by 93, and they were laughed at for it. I can say this in front of Humza Yousaf because he was far too young to be involved in the 92 election, but they were a laughingstock, and they returned 3 MPs to Westminster. Now they're the government of Scotland. They have had this referendum, and whatever way it goes, they will have had a substantial proportion of the country be persuaded that Scotland should be an independent country. That's a journey you can't go back from. They have persuaded people Scotland could be an independent country, even if they haven't voted that it should be. And if less substantial change follows along that road, there will be problems in Scotland to come.
Let's just think for a second. I'll get Ruth and Humza in on this in a moment, because let's just explore maybe a little more the attitudes to independence, to Scottish independence, among voters, not principally in Scotland. That's what tonight's all about. That's what the referendum's about. But in other parts of the UK, because we've heard now from Belfast, we've heard from Wales. Let's go over to Jeremy once again.
It's really interesting looking at the attitudes to independence. Let's start with Scotland and this question, how should Scotland be governed? And just look at the Scottish views going back 15 years or so and see how they've changed. So here we have, as you can see, 15 years ago, devolution was the main answer being given by the vast majority of people here. Independence was quite low down the list. And then very few people saying no parliament at all. So the pink line, those saying nothing's needed, was very, very low. But as you see, as time goes on here, you can see gradually demands for independence increase, and we get to 2005, and then an SNP minority government comes in, and actually they seem to assuage the independence demands a bit, and devolution then becomes by far the preferred option. Still very few people with the pink line here saying no parliament at all. Get to the end, now you're close to the independence referendum, and you see the line progressing, and it's basically, isn't it, largely devolution from start to finish, with independence coming down and then coming back up. But then we get to the last year, and if you start just from last September, let's have a look at what happened here. So you start with the polls ending in the place the last graph left them in, and let's just have a look. Here we go. The no vote, therefore, on 50%. This is about a year ago. The yes vote on 31% and don't knows on 18%. And then these polls show gradually the no vote holding roughly steady, but the yes vote gradually showing that it's got a lot of potential to rise here. Now, interestingly, if you get to just through the summer here, July, August, see, it's still on 50%, the no vote. So it's still looking like the no vote is going to win in the referendum, which by this stage is only a month away. And then you get this electrifying moment where the polls suddenly snap together like that, 46-44. Anyone's guess what the result is. That's why the timing of the referendum from the nationalist point of view has been so sweet. But the discussion about the attitudes of other parts of the country is fascinating. Wales and Northern Ireland and, of course, England. And let's have a look now at this question. How do you think Scotland should be governed? These are now English views. So I'll bring this graph on. We can have a look. Again, going back about 15 years. Let's see. Devolution is by far the biggest answer. Look at that. Way nearly 2/3 of people saying devolution. Not very many saying independence for Scotland. Not very many people in England saying no parliament at all. Most people thinking devolution is the answer. And so it goes, and gradually we go through. And again, you have the SNP in Holyrood in a minority and then a majority government. Independence starts to come up in England. People think, well, maybe that is the next step. Devolution starts to come down. There are also people getting more cheesed off, it looks like, in England, saying no parliament at all. And then by the end of this graph, which remember is English attitudes to Scottish independence, September 2013, people start to come back with the idea, well, maybe devolution is the thing. People being put off independence in England, possibly as a result of the last month or two, 6 months of campaigning, thinking devolution is the only answer. So that's England. Now, again, you can see differences between England and Scotland if we look at this issue. This question, compared with other parts of the UK, How much government spending does Scotland get? Let's look first of all at the Scottish answers on this. So just take a look at this. This is really quite dramatic. Most Scots thinking they don't get enough. Some thinking they get a fair share, very few saying Scotland gets more than it should. This is going back 15 years. And let's just watch this graph. There's a really interesting trajectory on this graph here, because the people saying Scotland doesn't get enough starts to come down. Those who say Scotland gets a fair share starts to come up. And again, this could be related to Holyrood, to the SNP coming into power in Holyrood and starting to convince voters that actually things in Scotland are working better for them. Very few, the pink line here, very few Scots saying Scotland gets more than it should. Move the graph on. Here we go. You see again those saying Scotland getting a fair share, those saying that it gets less than it should, roughly level pegging. So there's a level of dissatisfaction in Scotland about the amount of money it gets. If you look at the English answers on this, it's really interesting. So the same question, let's bring it up here. Compared with other parts of the UK, how much government spending does Scotland get? Now we look at the English answers here. And it's almost reversed. So have a look. So top answer, fair share. Most 42% of people saying it's fair. Then 21% people saying Scotland gets more than it should, and very few saying Scotland ought to have more money. And through we go. This is 15 years here, and you can see most people saying fair share. Gradually, English voters starting to think, well, maybe they're getting too much. And you can see, partly as a result possibly of Scottish devolution, English voters starting to say more and more that Scotland is getting too much money. And then look at that. How dramatic is that? More and more English voters saying Scotland gets too much money. And those saying it gets a fair share coming down here. And by the way, look at the blue line. This was the leading line in Scotland. These are people in England who think Scotland doesn't get enough. So by the end of this graph, you really, comes together at the end, partly because maybe as a result of the referendum debate, English voters start to think, well, maybe Scotland isn't getting over much money, maybe it does need a bit more, maybe it is getting a fair share. But the thrust of this is that the attitude towards spending in Scotland, if you compare Scottish answers and English answers, is very, very different.
Jeremy, thank you very much. And thank you very much indeed. Back we come to our guests here in the referendum results studio. And before we pick up on those interesting attitudes that Jeremy was telling us about, some news we're getting in, some more intelligence we're getting in. Sarah, what do we have?
This isn't a result, but we have got some news from Falkirk where Better Together are saying the result is very tight, but they think, with postal votes thrown in, that No will win comfortably. Now, you might say Better Together would say that, wouldn't they? But they haven't been saying that about other counts. And if there is a no vote in Falkirk, that will be quite surprising. You might have thought that that was an area that was more likely to vote yes. It has a very interesting political history. This is where Dennis Canavan was a Westminster MP for years and years, Labour MP. Tried to stand as a Labour MSP when the Scottish Parliament first was created in 1999, but he wasn't selected by the Labour Party. So he stood against the official Labour candidate as an independent. He won a thumping majority. He stood again in 2003. He got the biggest majority in the Scottish Parliament. And where is he now? He's the chair of the Yes Scotland campaign, a former Labour MP, former independent MSP who's made the journey towards yes. You might have expected that quite a few people in Falkirk would have gone with him. It's been voting SNP in Holyrood elections recently. If Better Together are right, and if they think that there is a comfortable win for the No camp in Falkirk, that will be a very interesting result.
What do you make of that?
The intelligence we're getting is in those die-hard traditional Labour areas, actually the Yes campaign is starting to break through quite strongly. That's initial postal ballot sampling, all the caveats thrown in, etc., etc. But that'll be really an important battleground, which I'm sure you'll be covering, of course, and people will be watching extraordinarily carefully.
When you say starting to break through, what do you
We're hearing
mean?
from various postal ballot samplings that has been positive for Yes. I spent the last 6 hours of the campaign in Easterhouse in the East End of Glasgow, traditional Labour heartland actually, and incredible the support that we were getting.
Would you expect to win Falkirk?
I mean, I don't think we expect anything. I mean, we are throwing everything at it. We have thrown everything at it, and we'll wait to see the result when it's declared.
OK, Ruth, on that.
I think the SNP, it's sort of the Yes campaign, would need to win seats and local authority areas like Falkirk to be assured of victory. Slightly unfortunately on our side, I'm having a little bit of intelligence. It looks like that No might have just lost out in North Lanarkshire, which is an area, it's a much bigger constituency, a much bigger local authority area, more people in it than Falkirk has, but it's looking like it's going to be around the 51-49 for Yes. That's disappointing to me. I want to win them all. But I think what's really coming across here is that there has been a titanic campaign between primarily the SNP and the Labour Party for West Central Scotland votes, and actually in areas such as Moray, Banff and Buchan, West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, Aberdeenshire, Scottish Borders, Dumfries and Galloway, where there's much stronger Liberal Conservative heartlands. Actually, the vote for No has held much stronger, and I think that's been replicated. I know I took a pop at the pollsters earlier, but one of the things that a lot of them did was try to marry up voting intentions, or how people voted at the last Scottish election, with how they're going to vote this time round. And, you know, in some polls, up to a fifth of SNP voters were voting No, up to a third of Labour voters were voting Yes. In every single poll that I have seen over 2.5 years, well over 90% of Tory voters are voting No. Right. So, you know, we may have the Tories to keep the union together here. That's my plug for the Conservatives.
Bit of news. We've just heard Alex Salmond has apparently cancelled his visit to his Aberdeenshire count. That's where his own local count, where his Scottish Parliament constituency is. He's still planning to travel to Edinburgh later on Friday, where the final result will be declared. But read into it what you will. But the SNP spokesman says he's no longer planning to turn up at the Aberdeenshire count.
Thank you.
I think you can read in quite a lot to it. Of course, we don't know, Hugh, but, you know, those sorts of decisions about where people are placed are significant. Remember the symbolism in each of these results. Falkirk, William Wallace, Braveheart, Battle of Falkirk. Each of these will be seen as symbolic, as well as, of course, if they're very important in terms of adding those votes up in each column as well. But the North Lanarkshire vote would again be very important in this battle in what's called the Central Belt, the traditional Labour heartlands, and the extent to which they have switched to the SNP.
OK, let's pause for a second. I think Hamza and Ruth, you may be leaving us at this stage, but it's been nice to have you. Thank you very much. We're going to just take a little pause and we'll catch up with the latest summary of the news.
Hello, I'm Carol Walker with a summary of all tonight's main news. The polls have closed and counting is underway in the Scottish independence referendum. No exit polls were conducted during the historic ballot, but a YouGov survey has predicted the No camp is on 54% compared to 46% for the Yes campaign. The final result is expected shortly after 6 o'clock in the morning. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
It might not be quite the colour you're used to, or in the right country, but this Scottish Statue of Liberty does give you the gist of the campaign for independence. And yes, they've been rather fired up.
In Stricken polling station here in Aberdeenshire, we usually use that wee room just at the side here, but today they've got the whole assembly hall in the Ritchie Hall because there's so many people already coming in to vote. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take Scotland's future into Scotland's hands.
Tonight, the nocturnal arithmetic is underway. Here, the ballot boxes arrive in Glasgow. Meanwhile, down the road in Falkirk and in Dumbarton, the adding up has begun. And who says people couldn't care less about politics? People have queued to vote. Turnout is expected to be huge. Those hoping Scotland will remain part of the UK, the No campaign, say a No vote tonight would be just the beginning.
A No vote finishes the job of devolution. It brings the extra powers of taxation and other areas that are needed to finish the job, you know, to rebalance the political debate in Scotland.
But we then have a very unbalanced system.
And that then unlocks constitutional reform across the whole of the United Kingdom. It unlocks whether it's going to be an English Parliament or regional assemblies or whatever the people of England themselves want.
An opinion poll done by YouGov after people had voted suggests Scotland will vote no. But only one poll counts, and that's the actual one, and so far we've had no real results yet. It might have gone midnight, but this is just the warm-up. Chris Mason, BBC News.
A new video has been released which appears to show a British journalist being held captive by Islamic State extremists. John Cantley, seen here in Syria, was captured while working as a newspaper journalist. In the latest footage, Mr. Cantley is seen sitting behind a desk, dressed in orange clothes, delivering a scripted speech to camera. And the United States Senate has approved President Obama's plan to arm and train moderate Syrian rebels to fight Islamic State militants. It's part of Washington's campaign to fight the group, which has taken control of a swathe of territory across Syria and Iraq. Speaking afterwards, President Obama welcomed the Senate vote and also praised France for its decision to join airstrikes against Islamic State in Iraq. Detectives in London investigating the disappearance of Alice Gross have named a Latvian builder as the prime suspect. Police say Arnis Zalkans had served a prison sentence in Latvia for murdering his wife. He was missing a week after 14-year-old Alice disappeared in late August. The schoolgirl was last seen on the towpath that Arnis Zalkans used to get to work. Police in Thailand say they still haven't identified any suspects in the hunt for the killer or killers of 2 British tourists. The bodies of Hannah Witheridge and David Miller were found on a beach on the island of Koh Tao on Monday. Also today, Thailand's Prime Minister apologised for suggesting that it's unsafe for female tourists to wear bikinis. The comments were widely criticised as insensitive. Well, that's it for now. Let's go back to Scotland Decides.
Welcome back to Scotland Decides. In a moment, we'll have a look at some of the counts and talk to some of our colleagues there to see when we might expect a first declaration. I'm told the turnout in Renfrewshire is 87%. Again, an exceptional turnout, which mirrors that in Clackmannanshire, about 89%. And indeed, underlines what we expect now. Pretty record turnout all round. Let's go to Andrew Neil at Westminster.
Here in Westminster, we've been told that the Queen is to make a written statement this afternoon. Of course, what she says will depend on the result. And the messages I'm getting, the Westminster consensus, I don't know why they know, but the Westminster consensus here is that no has won. And they're proceeding on that basis. Now, they may be in for a rude shock when the results actually come in, but that is the basis that they're proceeding, and they're now working out what they do next. Let's look at the choices. I'm joined by constitutional expert Peter Hennessy and historian Kate Williams. Peter Hennessy, even if it is a no vote, we are on the brink, I would suggest, of a constitutional upheaval across the United Kingdom.
Absolutely. Shortly after first light, a line will have been scored across the history of these islands. And even if we are staying together, we will be a different country the other side of that line because of the percussive effects of the Scottish campaign, the Scottish question dominating. The English question has hardly been rumbling, but it's soon going to pick up a roar. And there'll be a lot of England arise. We've had it already with John Redwood and Diane Abbott discussing with you. And also, it's fascinating, the news about the Queen, because the palace, like the rest of us, has no precedent to guide them. They've never had to face anything like this. There's a choreography to elections where the new Prime Minister, when it's quite plain that they're going to command the confidence of the House of Commons, goes to kiss hands and so on, and then into number 10 with the well-rehearsed spontaneity and all the rest of it. Elections we know about, general elections, but there is no precedent for this. So it's very interesting that the Queen is going to put out a written statement this afternoon, because I can't think of any parallel.
Okay. Kate, the issue would seem to me is that there is now going to be a substantial English dimension. If England is now going to speak, as well as Northern Ireland and Wales, I don't for the life of me see how the government can keep to the Gordon Brown timetable that the Home Rule deal for Scotland will be in place by the election.
Yes, I think that's true. I think this is a big question, isn't it? The English view of this, because we've talked about the United Kingdom view, but Peter's so right. I mean, this is the end of the United Kingdom as we know it, and this is a big part for the English as well. And if there's a yes vote, it simply changes so much about the United Kingdom. I mean, even on basic things like the flag, and it radically changes the Queen's role. I mean, that is really why the palace is following it so closely. And simply the timetable, as you say, it's incredibly tight. I can't see how, if there's a yes vote, because there's been so little planning already. As we've seen, so little planning in Westminster for a yes vote, how on earth that could move forward?
Will there not now be a demand from backbenchers on Labour and Conservative side for any move towards Home Rule for Scotland to be seen in the context of an overall UK constitutional convention?
There will be, and there should be. We have a habit as Brits of doing things in slices. We have, for some reason, an aversion to looking at our government as a system. And we've got to do it. We've got to look at it as a system this time round. Well, the best thing to do would be a declaratory white paper saying we're going for Devo Max, but we're also looking at the knock-on effects for England. Wales is also on the track for further devolution, the so-called Silk 2 proposals, and indeed Northern Ireland, which of course is a special case. What we really need is a Royal Commission or a convention to look at the whole. It would be absurd to rush it, because constitution...
Well, you can't do Home Rule by May of next year for Scotland.
No, exactly. Constitutions have to be carefully constructed so that they endure and they bring both stability and predictability. And this, to be a bit unkind to the three-party leaders, and I can understand why they've rushed to do it, is classic Tommy Cooper constitution making. You put a few Devo Max proposals on the back of an envelope, and just like that, new British constitution.
Just finally, just a few seconds, was the Queen right to stay out? Unlike the devolution debate, was she right to stay out of this?
Oh, definitely. I mean, she was right on so many levels. The neutrality has increased a lot since 1977. But most of all, if a yes vote goes through, she will be the monarch of Scotland. And if she's come out pro-union, that's simply going to compromise her position when she is monarch of Scotland. And, of course, encourage the referendum on the monarchy that some, not Alex Salmond, but other members of the SNP and other MPs have talked about as being part of an independent Scotland.
The debate's been in Scotland. In 10 seconds, it moves here?
Most certainly, inevitably, and indeed it should do, from first light this morning.
Well, first light is still a little while away, but I thank you both. Back to Scotland Decides.
Thanks to Andrew. We're certainly hoping for results before first light, for goodness sake. We should get some pretty good hints before then. We've already had a hint from Falkirk, where the No campaign were making very confident noises. I mentioned the smallest local authority, Clackmannanshire in central Scotland, an electorate there just under 40,000. They're in a race, really, I think with Orkney probably, to get the first declaration out. And our correspondent there is Jamie McIver. He's in Alloa in Clackmannanshire. Jamie, what is your sense of the progress of the count there?
Well, certainly the count here is making very fast progress indeed, Hugh. It got underway relatively early because Clackmannanshire being such a small county, it didn't take very long for the ballot boxes to all arrive here in Alloa Town Hall. In terms of how things are going, well, some people would have predicted that Clackmannanshire was perhaps the most likely place in Scotland to vote yes. But talking to some of the people here, I think it's safe to say that the Better Together campaigners here are perhaps looking a little bit relieved, and some of the Yes Scotland campaigners here just a little bit more anxious than you might have expected. This place is perhaps not following quite the script that might have been written by some beforehand. We're expecting the result here at 2 o'clock, and it's certainly going to be watched closely across Scotland, because if the script that some had written is to be believed, if it's a no vote here in Clackmannanshire, it would certainly appear to reduce the possibility of a yes vote across Scotland.
Just a quick one then, Jamie. Any sense there that the declaration is near, or do you have any sense of timings there?
Some sense of timing, Hugh. We're picking up now that the declaration may come just before 2 o'clock, so in just over an hour's time, so maybe just a little bit earlier than we had expected earlier on.
Yeah, I wish I could say we were smiling, Jamie, at that point. We weren't. But thank you very much. Jamie McIver there for us in Alloa, Clackmannanshire. Well, if it's 2 o'clock, I think it's fair enough to say that Orkney will probably win that race. I'm delighted to say that I'm delighted to say that Margaret Curran is with us and that Patrick Harvey is with us too. Thank you very much. Good to have you with us. What I meant to say was that Better Together was saying something about South Ayrshire.
Yes,
right,
Better Together are saying that the early signs are positive in South Ayrshire, much the same mood that we heard from Jamie McIver that you're getting from Better Together in Clackmannanshire. Now, South Ayrshire is very much in the middle of where the predictions would be as to how it was going to vote, so it would be very interesting to see which way that one goes. Slightly older population there, a lot of retirees in South Ayrshire, and traditionally the over 65s have been very reluctant to vote yes. That's the one group that Yes Scotland haven't really managed to reach, and Better Together are saying that South Ayrshire looks positive for them, which could be an indicator of how the rest of the night will go.
And also being told, Sarah, that the turnout in Inverclyde, which we talked about earlier, that's west of Glasgow, is heading for 88%. So on that note, Margaret and Patrick, that benchmark, a remarkable benchmark in this democratic process, really, this enormous turnout. What is your sense of how things are going at the moment?
Well, turnout's remarkable. And I saw my own constituency in the east end of Glasgow, you know, that is really very significant. But it's interesting, the pattern seems to be that the no side of the argument seemed a bit more upbeat, with some of the yes side not quite so sure. And I did have a sense that the arguments were being won by our side in the last few days, and did have a sense that some of the undecideds were coming more to that side. Not being presumptuous at all. No. It's a closely fought argument. People are taking this desperately seriously. I also think voters had a real sense of responsibility, and that sometimes weighed on their shoulders quite a bit. They knew the implications of this. They knew this, it was certainly a once in a generation, if not more, decision, and had enormous implications for themselves and their grandchildren. You often heard that at the doorstep. So people took this vote very seriously, and I think perhaps the Yes campaign not answering some of those questions in those last few days, I think did begin to seriously matter.
Patrick, your perspective?
Well, let's look at that turnout. It's clearly the highest turnout since the immediate post-war generation. If it's up to beyond 85%, it's the highest turnout in the age of the modern universal franchise, modern democracy. I think that speaks of something about the seizing of a moment, the opportunity to challenge what is, in many people's eyes, north and south of the border, a broken political system that's been propping up a broken economic system that no longer works in the interests of most people. Now, I think people in Scotland have been channeling that legitimate anger about a broken political and economic system into something positive during this campaign. If it's a yes vote, then we clearly have a path forward for that, defining a written constitution, managing the transition to an independent country. If it's a no vote, it becomes much more challenging, but still vital to capture that energy and to make sure that we can build alliances with people elsewhere in these islands who share the anger, and many of whom have not been turning out to vote in any elections because they see a political system that is not representative of them and is certainly not serving the interests of the common good.
Sorry, Sarah.
Politicians across Britain, across the world, are going to be looking at these turnout figures and wondering, how can we replicate that? How can we get people to be this engaged in our democracy and turn out to vote? Now, of course, it's the enormity of the question and the significance of this vote that in many ways has turned people out to vote. But this campaign has been completely different from a general election or a Scottish Holyrood election, partly because it's not been politicians talking to the voters. Voters have been talking to each other. They've been doing it on social media, which is something that's relatively new in electioneering, but they've also been doing it in town halls, in shops, in pubs, in meetings. Hundreds, thousands of people turning out every night, not to listen to elected MPs and MSPs speaking to them, but people talking to each other, grassroots campaigners getting up, and a conversation that's gone on between voters has cut some of the traditional media out of it and a lot of the elected politicians out of it, and that's one of the reasons why people have become so engaged.
Patrick, at this stage of the night, and I know this is not the easiest question, but, what's your sense? We've heard from quite a few people so far that Better Together feel pretty buoyant at the moment for, maybe that's misplaced, we don't know. But what is your sense of things?
Yeah, it's the easiest question to ask and the hardest one to answer in these first few hours of the... Look, we don't know until you count all the little pieces of paper. That's what the whole process is about. And until we get some actual results in, then we won't really know. Clearly, the pollsters acknowledge that a really high turnout increases their margin of error. So we don't really know how accurate the polls have been either. Really, the question, yes or no, should Scotland be an independent country, is only one part of this. Scotland, for several years now, has been debating what kind of country does it want to be. That's a deeper, a more open-ended conversation that's been happening right throughout Scotland, and it's because it's got way beyond the bounds of traditional politics, way beyond party lines about how people have been voting, whether people have been voting in elections, and it's engaged people who've been justifiably angry and disillusioned about politics. That's why it's not only got a high turnout, but that's why it's got anywhere close, even close to a victory. That would not have happened if this was a traditional political process.
Interesting. Patrick, thank you very much. I'll be back with Margaret in a second too. I suppose clues is what we're after, isn't it? Clues. Which councils, which local authority areas, if you like, have the characteristics which might suggest that they're more likely to vote for the retention of the union. Let's join Jeremy once again.
Hugh, thanks. Now, a lot of people saying, well, maybe no are doing well and so on. Let's just remind ourselves, if we look at our 32 councils, yet we haven't got any results from these councils. When they come in, green for yes, red for no, we will put the percentages on the board here and you will see the councils gradually stacking up and we'll have numbers, and until then we definitely don't know. If I order them in size, again, just to make clear, these are the vital councils, the ones with the oomph in this election. Glasgow with 500,000 voters nearly, Edinburgh, Fife, North and South Lanarkshire, Aberdeenshire, and then gradually the councils get smaller. As they get smaller, they may be counting faster, of course, so maybe we'll hear from Orkney and Shetland and Clackmannanshire and so on before the bigger ones. But these ones here we will be looking at. And a reminder, we're talking about what we think may happen, but have a look at this. This is where we are at the moment. We're looking for results. What's happening? 3 progressing squares means they're still thinking, they're still counting. Do we have any results yet? No, we don't. We will fill them in as soon as we do. But as Hugh said, we can look for clues. So what I've done here is ordered the council boxes by identity, by British. So if you ask people how they identify themselves, they can say, if they live in Scotland, Scottish, or Scottish and British, or just British. And here we see the councils where people say just British. Shetlands, most of all, Argyll and Bute, Edinburgh, Murray, lots of English retirees in Murray, Orkneys and so on. And down we go. Come down here with me and you'll see. And then towards the end of our vault here, you will see in the distance, very, very grey, very faded purple, Inverclyde, very heavy, strong Scottish identity. Now, it is the case that where people identify themselves as British, they are more likely to vote against independence. So we'll, again, clues, patterns is what we're looking for here. Shetlands, Argyll and Bute, Edinburgh, the second biggest council. Could that be voting no just on this index alone? Well, probably not. But it's worth just discussing it and airing it. One more for you. Now, this is councils by age. We also know that older people tend to be more worried about the idea of independence. You see Argyll and Bute there again. Dumfries and Galloway, more older voters there. That's on the border with England, thought likely to vote no. South Ayrshire, Eleanor Shear, Western Isles, Scottish borders, again on the border with England. Are we looking here at the no councils? Come on down the blocks with me. Let's have a look at the other end of the vault. Let's see where the fewest older people are. West Dumbartonshire, Aberdeenshire, Dundee City, thought likely to vote yes, and so on, and they grade out towards the end. Edinburgh, a very young city, towards the end there. So again, 2 indices we could look at, British identity and age, as a clue to which councils may vote no. But I stress, looking at the blocks earlier, those 3 progressing squares just remind us we don't have any numbers yet, Hugh.
We don't, Jeremy. Thank you very much. Hopefully we'll have some quite soon. We mentioned Falkirk earlier, the terrain of Dennis Canavan, former Westminster MP, of course now been chairing the Yes campaign. And Mr Canavan is with Andrew Marr in Ingleston. Let's join them now.
Thank you, Hugh. As you heard from Sarah earlier on, Dennis Canavan was a Labour MP, albeit quite a rebellious Labour MP, and he's now moved all the way over to chair the Yes campaign. He's with me now. Why did you make that journey, Dennis?
Well, I was virtually born and brought up in the Labour Party. I was a Labour MP at Westminster for 26 years, followed by 8 years as an independent member of the Scottish Parliament. I've been retired now for 7 years, and retirement gives you time to think, and I have come to the conclusion that Westminster is completely out of touch with the people of Scotland, whereas the Scottish Parliament responds far more effectively, far more positively to the wishes, the needs and the aspirations of the people of Scotland, you know, on things like the abolition of the university tuition fees.
So is this the way to get socialism in Scotland, in essence, to do it through a Yes campaign rather than through the Labour Party?
I think there would be a better chance of a left-of-centre agenda being a consensus within the people of Scotland and within the Scottish Parliament, yes, compared to the wishy-washy, diluted nonsense that we're having to experience at Westminster, where even the leader of the opposition, Ed Miliband, is intent on continuing the Tory benefit cap, is intent on cutting further the welfare for young people, and of course keeping the Trident nuclear weapon. This is all anathema to most Scots.
So let's turn to the actual campaign tonight. You're chairman of the Yes campaign. You've heard that YouGov are calling it for no. Sarah was talking earlier on about Falkirk. You were MP for Falkirk West. Now, there are suggestions that Falkirk might vote no, which would be a huge blow, would it not, for the Yes campaign?
I think that suggestion is based upon the postal votes, right? Now, the postal votes in Falkirk, or anywhere else for that matter, they're not a representative sample of the population as a whole.
So gang wearily.
I spent most of the day in Falkirk, you know, going around Falkirk itself, places like Denny and Larbert and Stennismuir. A great reception, and our campaign workers are telling us, not just from Falkirk, but elsewhere up and down the country, that we are going to get a good result. And I'm still optimistic, despite these exit polls or whatever.
Your pecker is still up at this point?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm certainly not conceding, and you know, I've been campaigning for this for, well, that's a couple of years now that we set up our campaign, and I think we've built up the most successful grassroots community-based campaign that Scotland has ever seen, and I think that we can still win the famous victory.
And you don't think there are signs that things are looking a little bit bleaker for you on the Yes side than they were a couple of hours ago?
I accept a slight disappointment in that exit poll in particular, but I'm still optimistic because you know, there's no declarations of any results yet from any local authority